Hello there, welcome back to Backyard Ballistics. This is a special episode as this is probably the most valuable gun I've ever featured on the channel, a 1918 A2 Browning automatic rifle or BAR. They're very hard to come by and this one came together with the two Thompsons you saw in my last video. I'm not going to lie, it's in very bad shape, but at least it looks complete. For some reason the stock was found together with a gun but detached from it, maybe to reduce bulk. It looks like this gun was stored in some sort of greasy canvas that protected some areas better than others. It also looks like the receiver corroded somewhat differently than the rest, and as you'll see there's a very good reason for that. I used a cleaning rod to make sure the gun was unloaded, but it felt really rough going down, so I'm afraid quite a bit of rusting happened in there. There is no way I'm getting these apart without the help of a chemical bath, so my focus is on taking the forearm off, therefore not having to soak it in liquid. In theory you're supposed to take the whole gas tube out with it, sliding the whole thing forward, but that's not gonna happen today. The heat shield is fully rotten anyway, so once unscrewed I can simply pull it down. Oops, that's charcoal. Same thing that happened on the Thompsons. Remember the charred woodwork? It looks like these guns have been involved in a fire. In my previous video I suspected somebody deliberately burned them, but as suggested by a commenter, a vehicle fire sounds like a more realistic scenario. Guns were often transported by vehicles, and upon taking a direct hit from an enemy one, the chances of them catching fire were considerable. Actually, if military vehicles are your thing, you'll certainly like War Thunder, the sponsor of today's video. Available for free on PC, consoles and mobile, it is the most comprehensive PvP vehicle combat game ever made, allowing you to take control of every possible military vehicle, including over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters and ships from 10 major nations, retracing the history of motorized warfare from the rudimentary vehicles of the 1920s to modern day war machines. All vehicles are realistically modelled and incredibly detailed, with realistic graphics, authentic sound effects, and with a worldwide community of over 70 million players, there's no game better suited for fans of military history. Each vehicle is modelled down to its individual components, and a sophisticated damage model is implemented when a vehicle is hit by enemy fire. Each type of armor, shell and missile behaves like their real-world counterparts. Hitting an ammo rack can easily make a vehicle explode or catch fire, just like what might have happened to whatever was transporting our guns. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile by clicking the links in the pinned comment or video description. New and returning players that haven't played for at least 6 months on PC or consoles will get a massive bonus pack comprising premium vehicles, the Eagle of Valor decorator, 100,000 Silver Lions and 7 days of premium account. Offer available for a limited time only, hurry up. Anyway, at this point I could simply put everything in the rusting bath, except I don't have a tank long enough, so I'll have to remove this thin rear tube that, as you'll see, has a very special function. Let me take it off. The spring you see is not the recoil spring, but is part of the firing rate reducer mechanism, a peculiar system that was introduced in the World War II design to render the weapon more controllable. This is basically a harmonic oscillator, where the little steel cylinder I'm holding in my right hand moves up and down the stock, pushed by the spring. The frequency of this oscillation defines the firing rate of the weapon, or at least that was the idea. This beefy spring instead is part of the recoil buffer system that has been part of the BAR design since its inception in World War I. Because yes, the Browning automatic rifle is a World War I design by John Browning, adopted in the last year of the war as the model 1918 BAR to be used in the role of a walking fire weapon. It was later revisited with the onset of World War II by the Ordnance Department, which arguably only made it worse. You can check for gun weapons video if you want to know more about the history. This spring has been messed up, probably during reassembly.
The firing rate reducer was somewhat susceptible to jamming if it got dirty, and some poor soul must have entangled the spring while trying to put it back.
Let's see if we can remove the magazine with what's known as hammer assisted magazine release. That's in very bad shape. Normally I would just replace a magazine in this state, but unfortunately a BAR magazine is not something you easily find in stores nowadays. While that soaks, let's have a look at the buttstock. The butt plate needs to come off before the stock can be removed from the gun, so it must have been deliberately taken off of it, and then the butt plate was put back on the stock so it didn't get lost. This is what we're left with after the first chemical bath. Let's see if that's enough to strip it. With that pesky pin out, I can gently slide the gas cylinder tube forward. What we've uncovered is the gas piston, which is what makes the BAR able to be self-loading. Also, notice how the front of the gas rod is shiny. That's because it's chrome plated. The whole handguard and trigger group neatly comes off, and it's in surprisingly good condition. This also finally lets us see what the insides look like, and I'm quite happy with what I'm seeing. It looks like the internals are all in good shape. And this is the actual recoil spring that in this design sits inside the gas rod, pulling the slide and bolt assembly with it.
I'm relieved by the fact it kept its springiness, which suggests it didn't lose its temper. That means the metal didn't get too hot if the gun was actually involved in a fire, since springs are the first thing to lose temper.
Time to gently tap the slide to the rear. To go ahead in the disassembly, I need to get the charging handle and slide pin aligned with this hole so I can drive the pin out. And there goes the charging handle. What I'm removing here now is instead the hammer. It has a very unusual shape for a hammer, and you'll see how it works in a bit. Next comes the slide with gas piston, and now we should finally be able to extract the bolt assembly. With everything apart, let's have a look at the barrel. In the past, I've had guns in conditions just as bad as this one on the outside, but with bores still in almost pristine condition. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Which is a shame, because this is probably the most valuable gun I ever worked on, at least in theory, and it has one of the worst bores so far. I mean, most of the stretch is just mildly bad, but in some areas it gets really bad. These are large, deep craters, and in case you're guessing, you definitely don't want them in a rifle bore. I realized that there was still leftover rust in some of the roughest areas, and went with this setup to dissolve it with the help of a rotating bore brush. If on one hand there's nothing I can do with the inside of the barrel, there is something I can do for the outside. There are some larger craters that are still filled with hard lumps of corrosion products, and I found a rotary tool with a fine diamond bit is the ideal tool to get them clean. While doing this on the receiver, I made the unpleasant surprise of uncovering some through holes next to the rear sight. Luckily though, that's far from where the breech locking action occurs, and it should only be a cosmetic issue. After cleaning the pits, I put the whole thing back in the bath, so it can act on the bottom of the pits in case I left some rust behind. Then I'm finally ready for welding. I'm using my Lampert micro arc welder to put some metal back where it belongs. There are some especially large craters I want to fill. Don't mind the ski mask, that's just to protect my face from the ultraviolet radiation while welding through the microscope. I did the same thing on one badly damaged portion of the gas tube. Here is before and after. The idea was doing the same on the receiver. Unfortunately though, that's not possible because this receiver is not made of steel.
I had already been warned by a commenter under my latest video, and it turns out he was right. This receiver is not made of steel, but of cast iron. Starting at some point in 1943, all new BARs used armor steel receivers, a grade of malleable cast iron that was specifically developed to combine the ease of casting typical of cast iron with the toughness of steel. Mechanically, it performed similarly enough to steel, while melting at lower temperature and flowing easily into molds like cast iron does. Unfortunately though, the weldability is miserable. I won't delve into the metallurgy, but there's no practical way that I know of welding these without serious risk of ruining it permanently. The damage here is mostly cosmetic, and I think the cure would be worse than the disease, so I'm just leaving it as it is.
Moving on to the magazine, I instead have to do something about it because I don't have a spare one and they're not easy to come by, so I'll have to make do with what I've got. That should do. There are a few extra vent holes though. On the bright side, the bolt group is instead very well preserved. Let's look at the forearm now. Although not structural, it kind of worries me because it took considerable damage. I could find a spare one of these, but differently than the magazine, the damage here is part of the operational history of the item, since we have all reasons to believe the guns were involved in a fire during the conflict. So I want to try and preserve it. The most obvious thing is repairing these cracks. Here I'm using some thin cyanoacrylate glue to soak into the fibers of the wood. This is a useful trick to consolidate surfaces before gluing them back together. Once that's fully dry, I'm using a 2-part cyanoacrylate to fill and seal the crack. Before it has a chance to set, I'm scraping off the excess from the surface. I then added a thin layer of the darkest wood filler I have to uniform the color as best as I can. And here's the result. The buttstock is instead made of a Bakelite fabric composite, and luckily it's not cracked, so all I have to do is give it a good clean and scrub. By the time I was done with it, the rifle had gone all rusty again. Just kidding, this is part of the finishing process.
About that, we need to have a serious talk. World War II BARs could be either blued or Parkerized, depending if they were converted from World War I and interwar models, or if they were made during World War II. This being made by IBM in 1943, it probably had receiver, handguard, and maybe the barrel Parkerized. I could Parkerize it, but I'm not sure that's a good idea in this case. As said, this receiver is made of cast iron instead of steel. I have no way of knowing if my Parkerizing process will work properly on it, or if a special one is required. Also, Parkerizing can lead to hydrogen embrittlement, and I don't know how this cast iron will behave in that regard.
So instead, I'm doing the least invasive finish of all types, a rust blue. It's completely reversible and risk-free, and the prolonged boils in water will actually wash up any residual derusting chemicals that might have been left in the crevices. My rust bluing recipe that you can find at this link is actually so effective that with only 3 passes I got a darker shade than I wanted, but considering how rough the item is, I'll stick with it. Now we can start putting everything back together. I'm giving a good brush to the gas tube to make sure the piston will slide in it effortlessly. Then I can start putting back the bolt group, slide, hammer, charging handle, and join them all with a link pin. I just need to finger it until I find the spot. There goes also the recoil spring with a bit more fingering. At this point we can finally get a clear picture of how this thing works. It fires from an open bolt with a recoil spring pushing the slide forward. Being attached to the bolt group through the link pin, the bolt also moves together with it. As it does so, it picks the first cartridge from the magazine, chambers it, and upon reaching its forwardmost position with the round fully chambered, it tilts upwards into a recess, securely locking the breech. Only at this point the firing pin tail is exposed before being hit by the central rib of the hammer, therefore setting off the cartridge. Once the bullet passes in front of the gas port, the shot gases push on the piston, giving a rearward impulse to the slide, causing it to unlock the bolt and move everything to the rear, and we're back to the starting point. The only thing left is the buffer. Similarly to a shock absorber, the recoil buffer is based on the combination of a spring and a series of friction caps and cones that act as a brake, dissipating excess kinetic energy of the reciprocating mass during firing in case it comes to the rear at an excessive speed. This is similar to the system used on the Browning Auto 5 semi-automatic shotgun that, as the name suggests, share the same designer, John Browning, with the BAR. Before I can go any further, I need to sort this spring. Not surprisingly, my attempt at untangling it to get back to the original spring size ended up with two smaller springs, to put it nicely. So I had to wind a new one, making sure the outer diameter, wire diameter, number of turns and rest length were the same as the original. It's probably at this point that the original spring was messed up. It's easy enough on a nice workbench, not so much out in the field. I'm also installing the flash hider that also came with the gun, but separate from it. And this is it. I wish I could have done more about it, but it really was in a desperate state. But does it work?
Well, it looks like it might. There are a couple of things that worry me about using full power loads in it though. The condition of the bore, sporting a nice collection of relatively deep rust craters, and the cast iron receiver, about which I have little first-hand experience.
However, the chamber is good enough to fire, so I decided to go with it. I started with a severely underpowered load, and it seemed to work fine. Of course, the gun wasn't able to cycle, but that's to be expected with these loads. What wasn't expected is the fact the bolt got stuck. I had to resort to a mallet for opening it, and this issue kept happening. By looking at the spent case, we see why. There is a deep rust pit right on the neck of the case, and the shot pressure is making the brass expand into it, locking the case in place.
On the bright side, the gun seemed to be structurally sound, and I even fired a full power cartridge remotely.
The good news is it didn't blow up the gun. The bad news is even that wasn't enough to cycle the action. The rough chamber neck is probably breaking the action too much for the gas system to push back. I ended up shooting a good 20 rounds of 80% pressure rounds, which would probably cycle the action on a good condition gun, but here the gas system simply can't push the bolt group past the cycling point. It's definitely working though, as the bolt performs the primer extraction and overcomes the neck bulging, so I can easily extract the spent case manually.
Actually, looking at the slowdown footage, we can tell the bolt is in fact moving backwards, just not enough to eject the spent case and cycle the action.
So basically now we have a 19-pound straight pull rifle, but it is what it is. Before leaving you, I want to give a final thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile by following the links in the pinned comment or video description. New and returning players that haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles, including premium vehicles and an exclusive vehicle decorator. Offer available for a limited time only. Hurry up. Once again, a huge thanks goes to my patrons, which as usual are all listed here. Thank you all for watching, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you next time. Bye.